Sup, chooms? How y'all living? Hope everything is Nova and you're all having a preem week. So first of all, I'm sure a lot of you right now are asking about what's up with the title of this video. Someone's got to be saying right now, but Kevin, how can you say that social media is the greatest cause of hair loss? You've always said that it's the trash hormone DHT that is the biggest cause of hair loss. You're not being consistent, bro. Well, it is definitely true that DHT directly causes hair loss, but we have ways to crush DHT with medications like Finasteride or Dutasteride. But if you are terrified to start these drugs because of fear-mongering on social media and internet forums, then DHT will ultimately win the battle and you will suffer from the slaphead curse for the rest of your life. It turns out that the biggest problem people have with Finasteride isn't the side effects at all. The biggest problem is just starting the damn drug to begin with. There is so much fear-mongering online about Finasteride that many people are just too damn afraid to start Finasteride at all. And believe me, chooms, I know this better than anyone because this affected me personally back when I was trying to get on Finasteride. I made several aborted attempts to start Finasteride, but each time I convinced myself that I was having sexual side effects and then I would stop the drug only to restart it again once I was worried about the progression of hair loss. Eventually though, I researched more about Finasteride and I realized that I was experiencing a nocebo effect. But once I realized that I was having a nocebo effect, I was able to start Finasteride and I've had absolutely no side effects at all for over a decade now, which is what happens to the vast majority of people who start Finasteride. I just didn't know it back then since the fear-mongering was so overwhelming. So, what is a nocebo effect? A nocebo effect is basically the opposite of a placebo effect. So, to put this all into perspective, let me explain what a placebo effect is first. A placebo effect happens when someone thinks they are taking a real drug, but actually they are taking an inactive pretend drug like a sugar pill. Even though a placebo has no active ingredients, it can still have beneficial effects like a real drug. Why that happens is definitely one of medicine's biggest mysteries, but it definitely does happen and the placebo effect is a real thing. The prevailing theory about why the placebo effect works is that it has something to do with changes in hormone levels or changes in the nervous system that happen when people think they are taking an effective medication. But again, it is still a mystery. But whatever the reason behind the placebo effect, we know the placebo effect is real. This is the reason why the best medical studies include a treatment arm and a placebo arm. For example, suppose there is a study of a new hair loss treatment where subjects are randomly assigned to get either a new treatment or an identically appearing placebo treatment, and the subjects don't know which treatment is which. Now, suppose that after 6 months, the subjects on the treatment had 10 more hairs per square centimeter than they did before the treatment. That would seem fairly impressive, wouldn't it? However, say the subjects in the placebo arm had 8 more hairs per square centimeter. So now the effect of the treatment seems much less impressive because there wasn't that much difference between taking the treatment and taking a placebo. So that's why a lot of companies who sell scam hair loss products and programs will back up their snake oil with actual scientific research, but the scientific research will lack a control group, and that's because just the placebo effect alone can make it look like an effective product. That's why it is so damn important to have a placebo control group in a study of any drug. So that's the placebo effect in a nutshell. So what about the nocebo effect? Well, the nocebo effect is similar, but instead of the placebo drug causing benefits, it causes harm in the form of side effects. It turns out that the mind can just as easily make things bad as it can make things positive depending on your perspective of whatever treatment you are using. And this isn't conjecture at all on my part, Jones. The nocebo effect, just like the placebo effect, has been proven to be real as well, and in fact, Finasteride is the perfect drug to prove this point. Let's take a look at a specific study on Finasteride and I'll show you exactly what I mean. This study is one of the first randomized placebo-controlled studies on using 1 milligram of Finasteride per day to treat hair loss. The study enrolled 1,553 men who were treated with either Finasteride at 1 milligram per day or an identically appearing placebo tablet. The study showed great results in terms of hair growth with Finasteride, as you can see in this figure here, but that's not what we're interested in here, chooks. Instead, let's look at the incidence of side effects in the Finasteride group and in the placebo group. In the first year of treatment, there was a 4.2% incidence of sexual side effects on Finasteride, and there was a 2.2% incidence of sexual side effects on placebo. Now, if there wasn't a placebo group in this study, you would probably conclude that Finasteride caused sexual side effects in 4.2% of subjects. But since in the people taking a placebo drug, there was a 2.2% incidence of sexual side effects, in reality, Finasteride only increased the incidence of those side effects by 2%. So, why do the people taking a placebo treatment get sexual side effects at all, you may wonder? Well, Some of those side effects may have just been from the nocebo effect alone, where just believing that you are taking medicine can cause side effects. It's also possible that some people just develop sexual problems because they would have anyways, even if they had not been taking a placebo. Sexual dysfunction is actually a very common and highly multifactorial condition, even in young people. However, sexual dysfunction in young people is usually psychogenic and not due to physical causes like high blood pressure like it is in older people usually, but psychogenic issues being the main driving factor behind sexual dysfunction in young people only further reinforces my point about finasteride and the nocebo effect. So, that study was published way back in 1998 when finasteride was a relatively new drug. It was only first FDA approved for hair loss in 1997 after all, and it was long before all the fearmongering from forums like the Propecia Health Forum and groups like the PFS Network disgraced the internet with their very presence. So it's very likely that the nocebo effect for finasteride is much, much more powerful today than it was back in 1998 when the internet was still a relatively new tool. I mean, we're living in the era of people claiming that finasteride made their anus numb, changed their sexual orientation, and even altered their gender identity and made them transgendered. This is complete madness, chums, but it still makes perfect sense because we already have a good idea of how powerful the nocebo effect really is because of a very important study published in 2007. In this study, 107 subjects with benign prostatic hyperplasia, also known as BPH, were given finasteride at 5 milligrams per day. However, they were not told it was finasteride. They were told it was a, quote, X compound of proven efficacy for the treatment of BPH, unquote. The men were divided into two groups. In the first group, no one was told that the X compound had potential side effects. In the second group, though, the subjects were told that the X compound may, quote, may cause erectile dysfunction, decreased libido, problems of ejaculation, but it is uncommon, unquote. Amazingly enough, after 1 year of treatment, the incidence of sexual side effects was 15.3% in the first group that wasn't told about sexual side effects, and it was a whopping 43.6% in the second group that was told about the possibility of sexual side effects. And we're not just talking about decreased libido here, chums. There was a 30.9% incidence of erectile dysfunction in the second group versus 9.6% in the first group. And remember, in the second group, they were just told that there was a slight increase of sexual side effects, nothing even remotely close to the kind of anti-finasteride rhetoric we are exposed to online these days. So, I'm sure someone is probably saying right now in the comment section, but Kevin, that's not fair. Maybe those guys who were in the first group that were never informed about side effects actually did have side effects, but they didn't suspect they were from the drug, so they never reported them. How come you didn't think about that one, bro? Well, that would be a good point, except the investigators actually asked every subject specific questions about sexual function during each follow-up visit. Here are the questions, and they are pretty explicit questions about any changes at all in sexual function. So, this study very clearly demonstrates that there is a very powerful nocebo effect when people are simply just informed that a drug like finasteride could cause sexual side effects. But just think about how much worse the nocebo effect would be if these men had known they were taking finasteride as opposed to this compound X placebo treatment that they were given, especially if they had all read about the fear-mongering online about finasteride that is prevalent today. That study was published way back in 2007, though, which was several years before most of the negativity about finasteride that we see today had really started to take off. And to make matters worse, in 2011, Merck added possible persistent sexual side effects to the package insert of finasteride because of pressure from the mainstream media, social media, and from frivolous litigation, even though the FDA actually admitted at the time that there was no evidence that finasteride caused any of these problems. They just simply bowed to media pressure. Nevertheless, as noted in this article on the history of finasteride, quote, shortly after Merck revised its label, thousands or perhaps hundreds of thousands of websites claimed that Propecia and finasteride caused erectile dysfunction and loss of libido. In addition, dozens of lawsuits and support group websites were formed, unquote. That article was published in 2019, and the authors noted that there were millions of Google searches linking finasteride to sexual problems and lawsuits at the time. If you look at Google search trends now, though, clearly the problem is unfortunately getting worse. Searches for finasteride side effects are rapidly accelerating. We see the same thing for Google searches for post-finasteride syndrome as well. Fortunately, though, searches for Haircafe are going up too, because I am one of the few channels on YouTube that is fighting to change the narrative about finasteride, and that is the strongest antidote to the finasteride nocebo effect that we have, chums. However, there's one more study I want to show you here because it demonstrates even more clearly just how powerful the nocebo effect really is. It was a study that was specifically designed to assess the nocebo effect. It's not a study on finasteride though, but I still think it's relevant. What it is a study on another class of drugs where there is also a lot of fearmongering and even alt-right conspiracy theories online. I'm talking about statin drugs that are used to lower cholesterol in the blood, which helps lower the risk of heart attacks. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole argument in this video about whether these drugs are good or bad, or whether cholesterol is good or bad. I am planning to cover this subject soon though in another video, but that's way too big and too controversial of a subject to take up here, and the controversy over statins has nothing to do with the point I'm trying to make in this particular video. What isn't controversial about statins though is that there are people complaining about statin side effects all over internet forums and social media. If you read these posts, you'd probably think that statins have a 100% incidence of side effects because they're so prevalent and so dramatic. Just like with finasteride though, Google searches for statin side effects have been increasing at an alarming rate, especially since statins have recently been politicized by alt-right conspiracy theorists and internet trolls. At the same time, statins themselves have been around for decades, and searches for specific statin drugs have actually decreased over time, interestingly enough. So it's clear to me that there's more and more online concern about statin side effects. So this is the context for this article here titled, quote, "Side Effects Patterns in a Crossover Trial of Statin, Placebo, and No Treatment," unquote. It's also known as the Samson trial. This is actually a very clever study that was well designed to figure out just how astronomically big the nocebo effect really is. The authors point out that over 50% of people who start statin drugs actually abandon them due to side effects. That's despite the fact that in the original statin trials that included thousands of subjects, there was no difference in the incidence of side effects between people taking a statin drug and people taking a placebo treatment. The subjects in the study were all people who had stopped statins because of intolerable side effects that occurred within 2 weeks of starting. The subjects each received 12 months of medication bottles. 4 of the bottles contained a statin, 4 bottles contained an identical looking placebo, and 4 were completely empty. The subjects were assigned to use each bottle over a month, but the order of bottles was randomized. So for example, someone might take a statin for a month, then a placebo pill for a month, then no medication for a month. Obviously, the subjects could tell when they had a month with an empty medication bottle, but when they were taking a bottle with pills, they didn't know if the pills were a statin or a placebo. The subjects kept a diary of their symptoms, and if the symptoms were intolerable, they could stop the medication for that particular month. 60 subjects were enrolled in the study, and here's a chart showing the study design. So, the main results of this trial comes down to this graph here. This graph shows 3 bars that show the severity of side effects when the subjects were taking no pills at all versus a placebo versus a true statin. If you look at the placebo bar versus the statin bar, there is a 0.9 increase in symptom severity with statins that was not statistically significant. However, compared to taking no tablets, both placebo and statins caused a significant increase in symptoms. I'll come back to this graph again in a little bit, but here's the other important graph from the study. Here you can see the percentage of times that the treatment had to be stopped because of intolerable side effects. It happened slightly more often with statins than with placebo, but the difference was actually not statistically significant. So let's return to the first graph again. The no treatment bar showed a symptom score of 8. Since these people knew they weren't taking any drug at all, these symptoms must just be background symptoms that they had independent of any drug or nocebo effect. Going from the no treatment bar to the placebo bar in the graph, the score increases from 8 to 15.4. So that's an increase in symptoms of 7.4 that can be attributed to the nocebo effect. Going from placebo to statin though, there is an increase in the symptom score of just 0.9 that can be attributed to the drug. So this trial by its design was able to precisely measure the nocebo effect, and it found that 90% of the symptoms caused by statins were actually due to just a nocebo effect. But this trial not only shows just how big the nocebo effect is, it also shows just how damn powerful it is. Almost as many people felt like they had to quit taking the placebo as they did the statin treatment. So the nocebo effect was strong enough to make people want to stop taking the pills, even though they were just measly placebo sugar pills that had no effects whatsoever. The study concludes, quote, "Side effects from taking statin tablets are verifiable but are driven by the act of taking tablets rather than whether the tablets contain a statin," unquote. So it is blatantly obvious that the nocebo effect is very real and extremely powerful, and clearly it is a big part of side effects, not just with statins, but also from finasteride and dutasteride. The nocebo effect is definitely made much, much worse by the rampant online fearmongering, and that fearmongering is getting worse and worse over time time, which is costing many young men all over the world their hair and their confidence. We as hair loss sufferers should not stand for this. That is why it is our duty as hair loss witchers to help spread the word and effectively change the narrative about finasteride forever. People who hate finasteride hate it because they are brainwashed civilians. But I don't want to be a civilian. I'd rather be a citizen. I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part too.
I think a study like the Samson Statin study really shows just how powerful the nocebo effect is, and I think recognizing that the nocebo effect exists and preparing yourself for it is the absolute best strategy to overcome it and defeat the slaphead curse once and for all. In the case of finasteride or dutasteride, it is the first step you need to overcome in order to ensure that you never lose your hair to begin with. You can't save your hair if you never start finasteride or dutasteride, and even if you do start it and get side effects, you should try to push through those side effects, because most of the time these side effects are just due to the nocebo effect, and even if the side effects are not nocebo, they will still usually go away on their own with continued use anyways. Alright, chums, I hope you found all that interesting. If you are an American, I hope you will join me in enjoying your tofurkey this Thanksgiving, but if you're not an American, that's cool too, and I hope you will all have a preem rest of the week regardless. Thank you all so much for watching, Hair Loss Witchers. I'll see you all next time. God bless.